The pool was still. Sunlight shimmered across the blue surface like broken glass, fractured but glimmering with something beautiful beneath. It was early morning, the hour when most athletes trained in silence. The rhythmic sound of splashes echoed faintly from distant lanes, but in Lane 4 stood someone who carried a different kind of weight. Her name was Amara Lewis, an 18-year-old swimmer whose name no one at the state swim club ever seemed to pronounce with respect. Amara adjusted her goggles slowly, breathing through her chest. The smell of chlorine was sharp in her nose, the kind that stung but reminded her she belonged to the water. She glanced at her reflection rippling below. "This is my lane," she whispered quietly. Her voice was barely audible, but in her mind it was a declaration. Around her, whispers broke out like ripples in a pond. She heard them. They were never subtle. "Who even lets her compete here?" one of the boys muttered from the edge. "She doesn't stand a chance. You know, swimming isn't really her thing," said another girl, laughing behind her towel. That familiar phrase, "not really her thing," had followed Amara since childhood. Ever since she first stepped into a public pool at 8 years old, someone had always told her that black people don't swim. It was said like a fact, like a law written into water itself. She remembered her first coach in middle school, a kind but cowardly man, hesitating to put her on the competitive team, afraid of what the others might say. At first, those words hurt. Then they hardened. Her mother, Ruth Lewis, was the one who kept her afloat, literally and spiritually. A single mother who worked 2 jobs at a local diner, Ruth carried pride like armor. Every night she'd press her daughter's hair, humming softly, saying, "Don't let their words drown you, baby. Water doesn't see color. It only sees power." That line had lived in Amara's heart ever since. But on mornings like this, when she stood surrounded by mocking laughter, she had to remind herself, power was not given, it was earned in silence. Coach Reynolds blew his whistle, snapping her thoughts. "All right, people, warm-up laps, then time trials. State qualifiers are next week, so I better see some real speed." Amara dived in, clean, quiet, graceful. The water swallowed her whole, then embraced her like an old friend. Down here, there was no sound, no laughter, no prejudice. Only rhythm, kick, breath, like a heartbeat. The water didn't mock her. It carried her. But when she surfaced, the laughter always returned. "Hey, Amara, careful. Don't get your hair wet." One of the girls shouted from lane 6, smirking. The boys laughed. Amara clenched her jaw. She'd heard that joke so many times it had lost meaning. It wasn't about hair. It was about belonging. When she climbed out of the pool after the first set, Coach Reynolds called her over. "Lewis," he said, flipping his clipboard, "you've been consistent. I'll give you that. But your reaction time is still slow. You'll never make nationals like that." "Yes, Coach," she said quietly. He stared at her for a moment, his voice lowering. "Look, I don't mean to discourage you, but you've got other strengths. Maybe think about coaching or lifeguard training. You're a natural leader. Not every lane is meant for everyone, you know?" It was supposed to sound like advice, but it felt like exile. That night, Amara sat by her small apartment window, watching raindrops trace paths down the glass. Her mother sat across from her, folding uniforms from the diner. The air smelt faintly of coffee and soap. "How was practice?" Ruth asked without looking up. "Fine," Amara said, a lie, soft and automatic. Her mother looked up, eyes knowing. "Are they giving you trouble again?" Amara hesitated. "It's not that. It's just, they all act like I don't belong there. Like I'm swimming in the wrong ocean." Ruth smiled faintly, that tired but fierce kind of smile. "Let them talk, baby. You know what happens when people don't expect you to win." "What?" "You shock them so hard, they never see the wave coming." Amara laughed weakly, but the word stayed. Over the next week, she pushed herself harder. 5 a.m. practices before class. Evening laps when the pool was empty. She trained until her muscles burnt and her lungs screamed. When she was alone, she didn't see herself as an outsider. She saw herself slicing through water like lightning, fast, unstoppable. But whispers travel faster than speed. A few days before the state meet, Someone posted a meme online, a photo of Amara mid-dive, captioned, "When you try to swim, but remember you don't float." It spread through the team group chat like wildfire. When she saw it, her throat went dry. For a while, she didn't say anything. Then she walked straight into the locker room the next day and dropped her phone on the bench. "Funny post," she said flatly, her eyes locked on the same boy who had laughed the loudest. He smirked. "Hey, it's just a joke. Don't be so sensitive." She stepped closer. "You think it's funny?" "Yeah. I mean, come on, it's—" Before he could finish, she said quietly, "Then remember that face when I win." No one laughed after that. The morning of the state qualifiers came gray and cold. The stadium buzzed with nervous energy. The smell of chlorine and adrenaline thickened the air. Banners hung from the ceiling, names of schools, teams, and champions. Amara stood behind the block, stretching her shoulders, her heartbeat steady but loud in her ears. "Swimmers, take your marks," the announcer's voice echoed. For a moment, the world went silent. Then the buzzer screamed. She dived. The water rushed around her, blinding and cold. Her arms cut through it like blades, her legs firing with pure precision. She could feel the others beside her, the splashes, the waves, but she didn't look. Not once. She thought of her mother's words. Water doesn't see color. She thought of every whisper, every cruel laugh, every meme, every smake. And then she thought of the silence she'd earned when she touched the wall first. When she finally surfaced, gasping, she turned to see the scoreboard. First place, Lewis, Amara, 52.07 seconds. The crowd went quiet before erupting into shock and disbelief. Coach Reynolds dropped his clipboard. The same kids who had mocked her just stared. One of them actually said, "No way." But Amara didn't cheer. She didn't even smile at first. She just looked at the clock again, making sure it was real. Then she exhaled slowly, a sound half sob, half relief. Later that night, when she and her mother stood outside the pool, the air still smelt of chlorine and victory. Ruth hugged her so tight it almost hurt. "You see, baby, the wave hit them." Amara laughed softly, tears mixing with the sweat still on her face. "Yeah," she said, "and it's just getting started." What Amara didn't know was that her victory that night was only the beginning. Because once the world sees a black girl win where they said she couldn't, they don't stay quiet. Some cheer, others fight harder to tear her down. But she wasn't afraid anymore. Because now, the water wasn't just her escape. It was her weapon. And she was ready to swim against the tide, no matter how strong it became. The air outside the arena that night was cold and sharp, carrying the faint echo of applause long after the crowd had left. Amara sat on the edge of the bleachers, her towel wrapped around her shoulders like a flag she'd finally owned. The lights above the pool glimmered across the surface. The same water that had once felt like an enemy now felt like home. Her phone buzzed in her hand. A flood of notifications, screenshots, mentions, posts. Her win had gone viral. Black girl dominates state finals. The underdog no one saw coming. Amara Lewis, rewriting history. At first, the praise felt unreal. She scrolled through hundreds of comments. Most were positive, some even celebratory. But in between, like cracks in marble, were others that stung. Affirmative action in the pool. "It's just one race. Calm down." She probably got lucky. Even in victory, they tried to take it from her. That night, as she sat in the locker room alone, she thought about the weight of that gold medal around her neck. It wasn't heavy because of its metal. It was heavy because it carried history. The next morning, local news crews showed up at the pool. Coach Reynolds looked nervous as he guided them toward Amara. "Keep it short," he whispered to her. "Be humble, okay." The reporter, a young white woman with a polished smile, approached with a "MIC Amara. First of all, congratulations. You've made history tonight. The first black female swimmer to win the state record in this division. How does it feel to be, well, different?" Amara blinked. "Different?" The woman smiled wider, sensing discomfort but pressing anyway. "You know, swimming isn't traditionally a sport associated with your community, right? How does it feel breaking that barrier?" It wasn't the first time she'd been asked that, but it still hurt. She forced a smile. It feels like I did what I came to do. I swam. The water doesn't care about color. I just wanted to be fast, and I was. The reporter chuckled lightly, maybe not expecting the firmness in her tone. Right. Very inspiring. Thank you. When the segment aired that evening, the title on the screen read, Breaking Barriers, the Black Swimmer Who Defied the Odds. It was meant as a compliment, but Amara hated it. She didn't want to be the black swimmer. She wanted to be the fastest. Period. At school the next week, things changed, but not all for the better. People stared. Some whispered admiration, others avoided her altogether. One classmate said, "You're famous now," like it was an accusation. Even her teammates didn't know how to act around her. During practice, Coach Reynolds tried to treat her like before, but the tone had shifted. "All right, Lewis," he said. "National qualifiers next month. But don't let this win get to your head. Pressure makes mistakes." She nodded. "I know. You'll need to double your training time if you want to keep up with the top national swimmers," he added. Then, almost under his breath, "They are not going to go easy on you." Amara caught the meaning. They never had. That evening, after practice, she noticed something strange. Her locker door had been scratched, deep cut spelling the words, "Water don't want you." Her stomach turned cold. She stared at it for a long time before she spoke. When she told the coach, he frowned but brushed it off. "Kids can be cruel," he said. "Don't let it get in your head." But it was already there, carved deep like those scratches. She told her mother that night, sitting at their small kitchen table. Ruth's face hardened. "Did he find out who did it?" "No," Amara said softly, "and he doesn't care." Her mother's hands trembled slightly. "You listen to me, Amara. You are not going to quit. You hear me? They want you angry. They want you gone. Don't give them the pleasure." Amara swallowed the lump in her throat. "I won't." For the next few weeks, she swam like she was chasing something she couldn't name. Every stroke was a punch, every turn a defiance. She trained when the others left, pushing past pain until her arms felt like fire. Late one night, she caught her reflection in the glass window by the pool. The dark skin, the powerful shoulders, the eyes that once looked uncertain are now steady and unblinking. She smiled faintly. "You belong here." The day of the national qualifiers came with thunder. The arena was huge, packed with cameras, flashing lights, sponsors, and banners. It smelt of ambition and sweat. Amara stood behind her lane, shoulders rolling, heartbeat drumming steady. Across from her were the top-ranked swimmers in the country, tall, lean, and confident. They looked at her with polite dismissal, like she was an extra in their story. "Lane for Amara Lewis," the announcer said. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Cameras zoomed in. Someone in the stands whispered audibly, "That's the one who broke state." As they stepped onto the blocks, one swimmer, a blonde girl named Caitlin, a national favorite, leaned slightly toward her and muttered, "You're fast, Lewis. But this isn't your pool anymore." Amara didn't answer. She just stared straight ahead. "Swimmers, take your marks." The buzzer screamed, and the world fell away. She dived into the water like lightning. Every sound vanished. Only the rush, the rhythm, the pulse of motion. Her arms cut through like blades, her body slicing cleanly beneath the surface. Halfway through, she could feel Caitlin just ahead. The world above roared, but Amara didn't hear it. She thought only of her mother's words, "Water doesn't see color." She pushed harder, every muscle screaming, lungs burning for air. Then, in the final 10 meters, she surged. Her fingers touched the wall first. For a second, silence. Then, chaos. The scoreboard blinked. First place, Lewis, Amara, 51.88 seconds. New national record. The crowd exploded. Cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters shouted her name. Coach Reynolds stared at her like he didn't recognize what he was seeing. The other swimmers pulled off their caps, staring. Caitlin looked stunned, mouth open, no words. Amara didn't raise her arms or scream. She just looked up at the time again and smiled faintly. It wasn't luck. It was labor. It was legacy. As she climbed out, drenched and trembling, someone pushed a MIC toward her face. Amara, how does it feel to make history again? She caught her breath. Feels like I finally stopped swimming against the current, she said. That clip went viral across every platform. Millions watched, shared, cried, and argued. To some, she was a hero. To others, a target. The next day, her social media was flooded. Thousands of messages. Some said, "You made us proud." Others said, "You don't belong in this sport." And somewhere in between, sponsors began calling. One morning, she woke up to find an email from a national sportswear brand. Subject, partnership offer, Amara Lewis. It felt unreal. The same people who laughed now wanted her face on billboards. But Amara didn't want fame. She wanted freedom. One afternoon, she visited her old public pool, the one where she'd first learned to swim as a child. The paint was chipped, the smell of chlorine faint, but the memories were alive. Little kids splashed around, laughing. A few of them stared wide-eyed when they recognized her. "Are you the lady who broke the record?" a little black girl asked shyly. Amara knelt beside her, smiling. "Yeah," she said, "but I used to swim here too. Are you going to swim someday?" The girl nodded eagerly. "Mama says black girls don't swim well." Amara's heart clenched. "Tell your mama," she said softly, "that water doesn't care who you are. You just have to love it enough to fight for it." The girl smiled, and for a moment, Amara felt something deeper than victory, purpose. But as her fame grew, so did the pressure. Sports commentators started dissecting her wins, questioning her times. Online trolls called her a media-made miracle. Even some teammates whispered that she'd peaked early. Coach Reynolds tried to steady her. "You've made it to the top, Lewis. Now the real fight begins. Everyone wants to see you fall." She nodded, quiet but unshaken. "Then I'll just swim higher." That night, alone in the dark pool after hours, Amara swam lap after lap, chasing silence, chasing freedom. Each stroke cut through the water with defiance. Each turn felt like rebellion. She was no longer swimming for anyone. She was swimming against everything that ever tried to drown her. And deep down, she knew this was just the beginning. Because when a black woman breaks a barrier, the world doesn't simply applaud. It watches, waiting to see if she can survive the storm that follows. But Amara was not afraid of storms. She was made from water itself. The months following her record-breaking swim felt like a blur. Interviews, sponsorship offers, photo shoots, and endless travel. Everywhere she went, cameras followed, and everyone wanted a piece of her story. But somewhere in the noise, Amara began to lose a quiet rhythm that had carried her this far. She missed the sound of water before dawn, the solitude of empty lanes, and the whisper of her own breathing echoing through the pool. Now, every stroke seemed to have an audience, every move an opinion. At first, she smiled through it, posing, answering questions, and staying polite. But the questions always circled back to the same place. How does it feel to represent your people in a white-dominated sport? What do you say to critics who think this is just a phase? Do you think being black gives you extra motivation? She wanted to scream sometimes. No, she didn't swim to represent her people. She swam because she belonged in the water, because it was where she found peace when the world above refused to let her breathe. One day, after a televised interview, she overheard two producers talking behind a curtain. "She's great for diversity," one said casually. "Yeah," the other replied. "Perfect face of the campaign, strong but not too outspoken." That stung. Not too outspoken, as if her silence was part of her brand. She went home that evening and sat on her bed, staring at her gold medals hanging from the lamp. They glittered under the dim light like trophies from another life. Her phone buzzed again, another flood of messages. One caught her eye, a DM from an anonymous account. "You'll never be one of them. They'll use you and throw you away. Watch." She ignored it at first, but soon the same message appeared again, and again. Then came the photos. Someone had taken pictures of her at practice, outside her apartment, and at the grocery store. Always from a distance, always watching. Fear crept in slowly, like water seeping under a locked door. She told Coach Reynolds. He frowned but didn't seem alarmed. Probably just fans, he said. Comes with fame. But Amara didn't feel famous. She felt hunted. 2 weeks later, at the National Press Meet in Atlanta, things took a darker turn. She was scheduled for a live swim demonstration, a new marketing event organized by her sponsor. Cameras were everywhere, journalists lined up, and fans filled the stands. As she stepped onto the diving block, she noticed something off. The water looked cloudy, not clear like usual. Her gut tightened, but the officials waved her forward. She dived in. Halfway through her lap, she felt a sting, a burn across her eyes and throat. Panic flared. She surfaced, coughing violently. The pool reeked of chemicals, too much chlorine. The crowd gasped as she struggled to breathe. She was rushed to the medical tent, eyes red, lungs raw. When she could finally speak, she asked what happened. One official said it was an accidental overchlorination. But she knew that wasn't an accident. Someone wanted to send a message. That night, she sat in her hotel room, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the city lights. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. Told you, you don't belong. Her hands trembled. For the first time, she thought about quitting. The next morning, she called her mother. "Mama," she whispered, voice breaking. "I can't do this anymore. Every time I swim, they find a way to remind me I'm not supposed to be here." There was silence on the line, then Ruth's calm voice. "Amara, baby, do you remember what I told you after that first swim meet?" Amara nodded weakly. "You said the water don't care." "That's right," her mother said. "But people do, and they'll test you. Every time you rise, they'll try to pull you back. That's not because you're weak. It's because you're shining too bright for their comfort." Amara wiped her eyes. "It's hard, Mama." "I know, but you weren't made to survive comfort. You were made to survive struggle." That night, Amara walked down to the hotel pool alone. It was past midnight, quiet, empty, calm. She sat by the edge, dipping her toes into the cool water. She whispered softly to herself, "They want to drown me in fear, but fear doesn't float." Then she slipped into the water and began to swim. Slow, deliberate, every stroke cleansing the doubt that had clung to her. Over the next few weeks, she withdrew from the spotlight. Sponsors called, reporters complained, and fans speculated. Is she done? Has she quit? Maybe it was all hype. She didn't care. She focused on healing, both body and soul. But destiny had other plans. A month later, the national team trials were announced. The event would determine who would represent the country in the upcoming World Championships. Her name was still on the roster. When Coach Reynolds called, his voice was hesitant. "Are you sure you're ready for this, Lewis? It's a tough crowd, and after what happened." "I'm ready," she said firmly. He sighed. "All right then, let's make some noise." The day of the trials arrived. The arena was massive, flags from across the country, roaring spectators, flashing cameras. But this time, Amara wasn't the underdog or the sensation. She was a question mark, the one everyone doubted could come back. Reporters whispered. Teammates avoided eye contact. Caitlin, her old rival, smirked when she saw her. Back for more drama. Amara didn't answer. She just adjusted her goggles and stepped onto the block. The announcer's voice echoed. Women's 100-meter freestyle. Final heat. The crowd hushed. Take your marks. The buzzer sounded. Amara dived, slicing through the water like a blade. The burn in her lungs felt familiar, almost comforting. Halfway through, she saw Caitlin just ahead. The crowd roared, but inside the water there was silence, the silence she loved. Her arms moved faster. She thought of her mother's words, of every name they called her, of every time they laughed. She touched the wall, and the scoreboard lit up. First place, Lewis Amara, 51.47 seconds. New national record. World qualifier. The arena erupted. She had done it again. The same people who doubted her now cheered and screamed her name. But this time, she didn't raise her arms in triumph. She just stood still, eyes closed, letting the sound wash over her like waves. That night, she sat alone in the locker room. Coach Reynolds came in quietly. You did it, Lewis. You're going to represent the country. She looked up at him. No, Coach. I'm going to represent every girl who was told the water wasn't for her. He paused, emotion flickering across his face. Then swim like it. The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Amara Lewis makes national team. Historic win. Black swimmer breaks another record. From hate to hero, the comeback of Amara Lewis. Her inbox flooded again, but this time she didn't look. She wasn't chasing applause anymore. In the following weeks, she trained harder than ever. Every morning began before sunrise. Every night ended with exhaustion. The media wanted interviews. She refused. She wanted silence, focus, and redemption. During one training session, her coach noticed something different. You're faster than before, he said. Amara smiled faintly. I'm lighter now. Lighter. She nodded. I stopped carrying their hate. When the World Championships arrived, she stood on the deck, calm and still. The lights were blinding, the crowd enormous, but inside her there was peace. As she adjusted her goggles, she caught her reflection in the water, strong, steady, unafraid. For years, they had mocked her. Now, they were about to witness her legacy. The world stage was something else entirely. The pool looked endless, a glass mirror beneath blinding lights, surrounded by thousands of spectators. Every movement echoed, every splash magnified. Flags from dozens of countries hung above, fluttering slightly in the artificial breeze. Amara stood in her warm-up jacket, headphones on, heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of her breath. Across from her, the world's best swimmers, women whose names were chanted like legends, stretched, focused, and unbothered. To them, she was still new, still an anomaly. But that didn't matter, because to Amara, this wasn't just a race. It was a culmination of every insult she'd swallowed, every door slammed in her face, every scar carved into her confidence. She looked down at her hands, strong, calloused, built through years of endurance. Then up at the stands, where she spotted her mother. Ruth Lewis sat quietly, tears glistening in her eyes, a small smile tugging at her lips. Amara gave a slight nod. It was all the strength she needed. As the announcer called her name, representing the United States of America, Amara Lewis. The crowd erupted, half cheering, half curious. Some clapped because she was theirs. Some clapped because she was history. But Amara wasn't here for history. She was here for freedom. She walked toward the starting block. The water shimmered like it was waiting for her. She took a deep breath. Her rival, Caitlin, stood beside her again, the reigning world champion. Caitlin leaned slightly and said under her breath, "Good luck, Lewis. Hope this one's not about race again." Amara smiled softly without looking at her. It never was. The buzzer blared, and she flew. Her dive was clean, slicing through the surface with perfect precision. The cold rush wrapped around her like an embrace. She kicked hard, strong, and steady. Every muscle remembered what to do. By the 50-meter mark, Caitlin was ahead, barely. The crowd roared, flashes pulsing like lightning. But Amara didn't hear them. All she heard was her own breath and her mother's voice in her mind. "You belong here." Then came the final turn. Everything slowed. Her arms stretched, her lungs screamed, her vision blurred, but her will didn't waver. She remembered the chlorine burn, the scratched locker, the cameras, and the laughter, and she pushed harder. When her hand hit the wall, she didn't know where she placed it. For a moment, there was only silence, heavy, breathless. Then, the scoreboard lit up. First place, Lewis, Amara, 51.12 seconds. World record. The roar that followed felt like an earthquake. People screamed her name, flags waved, and reporters shouted. The other swimmers turned toward her in disbelief. Caitlin looked stunned, her jaw slack, eyes wide. Amara didn't jump or shout. She simply lifted her head, water streaming down her face, and smiled, not in arrogance, but in peace. Coach Reynolds rushed to the deck, hands trembling as he clapped. Ruth stood in the stands, tears running freely, whispering, "That's my baby." As Amara stepped onto the podium, the metal place around her neck felt different this time. Not like a weight, But like a crown, cameras flashed in every direction, but she wasn't posing. She was present. When they handed her the MIC for her post-race interview, the arena fell silent. The reporter, the same one who once asked how it felt to be different, smiled nervously. Amara, the world is watching. You've made history tonight. Again. How does it feel to be the first black woman to hold this record? Amara took a slow breath. Her eyes scanned the crowd, faces from every race and every country, all waiting for her words. It feels, she began, voice steady, like I finally stopped swimming for permission. The crowd murmured. She continued, her tone growing stronger. For years, they told me I didn't belong in the water. They laughed, mocked, questioned, and tried to drown my spirit. But the water never cared what color I was. It only asked if I could keep moving. A hush fell over the arena. Even the reporters froze. I swam for every black girl who was told her hair, her body, or her skin didn't belong in this lane. I swam for every dreamer who had to fight twice as hard just to stand here. And I swam for the little girl inside me who just wanted to feel weightless again. The audience erupted in applause, standing ovation, cheers, tears. Ruth covered her mouth, overcome with emotion. Even Caitlin clapped quietly, a flicker of respect crossing her face. The clip went viral within hours. Across the world, headlines screamed, Amara Lewis breaks world record in barriers. The water doesn't care about color, a speech that moved the world. From mockery to majesty, the story of Amara Lewis. Her face was everywhere, magazines, news broadcasts, billboards. But for once, she didn't feel exploited. This was hers. Weeks later, she was invited to speak at schools and youth centers. Each time, she looked out at young faces, especially the little black girls who watched her like she was made of light. One day, she visited her old neighborhood again. The same pool where she once swam alone now buzzed with children. She walked in quietly, no cameras, no media, just her. The local coach saw her and froze. Amara, you came back. She smiled, had to see the next generation. A little girl, maybe 7, ran up, clutching a swim cap. Miss Amara, can you sign this? Amara knelt, signing it carefully. You like swimming? The girl nodded hard. I want to be fast like you. Amara smiled softly. Then don't swim to be fast. Swim to be free. That's how you win. The girl beamed, clutching her cap like treasure. Later that evening, as Amara stood alone by the edge of the pool, the sun dipped low, turning the water gold. She closed her eyes and whispered, We made it, Mama. Her mother stepped beside her, resting a gentle hand on her shoulder. No, baby, Ruth said, her voice tender and proud. You made them believe they can too. Amara looked at her reflection, calm, steady, unshakable. For so long, the world had defined her by color, by struggle, by difference. But standing there now, she finally saw herself for what she truly was, power, grace, and resilience in motion. That night, as she packed for her next meet, she paused, glancing at the gold medal lying on the table. She picked it up, turned it over, and smiled. Then, instead of hanging it on her wall, she placed it in a small box and labeled it, For the next girl. Because for Amara Lewis, greatness was never meant to be owned. It was meant to open doors. Months later, during a televised sports gala, she walked the red carpet, elegant, confident, and unbothered. A reporter stopped her again, microphone extended. Amara, you've inspired millions. What's next for you? She smiled, eyes warm but firm. What's next? Teaching the world that we've always belonged here. We just needed the world to catch up. And with that, she walked on, into the lights, into the future. Behind her, the screens replayed her race in slow motion, her final stroke, her victory, her smile. But what lingered most wasn't the time on the board. It was the message she left behind. The water doesn't see your color. It only knows your courage. And Amara Lewis, the girl they mocked, the swimmer they doubted, had become more than a champion. She had become a symbol, not just of strength, but of belonging, of what happens when a black woman stops fighting for space and starts owning it.